Chapter 27, Cartel Wives.
Alabama, Mia. Valentine's Day 2009 was on a Thursday. But because Olivia and I only got to visit Peter and Junior on Fridays, we decided to celebrate the day after the holiday. I used to write Peter 10-page love letters at night after Bella was asleep, so I packed one up along with some new family photos I'd recently taken and got in my car. When we arrived and settled into the visiting area, I turned to Olivia and Junior with a plan. Can you distract the guards for a little bit? They agreed, then cornered them and immediately began talking. Peter, let's go to the bathroom, I whispered.
Uh-oh.
We can't, he answered.
Here go one of the bees. We're finding out, as far as the book tell it, this was Viv's idea.
Someone will catch us. I put my foot down. I don't care. It had been months since we'd made love, and we missed each other desperately. I knew a prison bathroom isn't the most romantic place to be with your husband, but we needed that closeness and would have done anything to get it. Plus, Peter needed to feel like a human being again, and honestly, so did I. A few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Bella was barely 3 months old. I was shocked. But with a husband in prison and the rest of my life so uncertain, was I even just the tiniest bit worried or disappointed? Not for a second. My baby was a beautiful new beginning. In fact, having something so innocent growing inside me shielded me from what was happening to me and Olivia. The word was out about our husbands, and we'd been receiving threats.
Olivia. DEA agents were receiving intel and had been tapping phones for months, but sometime that winter they'd intercepted a suspicious call. A group of armed men were standing outside a hair salon, waiting for someone they thought was me to come out so they could kidnap me. Junior and Peter's attorney, Joe, called me in a panic with the feds on the line.
Imagine you the wrong one. You're not even Val. You get snatched up. You know what I'm saying? By a bunch of dummies trying to come get you. You get snatched up. You got nothing to do with nothing. You got no answers. They wildin'.
And when I picked up the phone, I heard the fear in their voices. Liv, you're in danger, they said. People are after you. I hadn't been anywhere near the salon. The person inside looked a lot like me, but it was the wrong girl. The kidnappers were about to kick in the door, but the feds showed up and prevented anything from going down. Still, the whole incident scared the shit out of me. I knew the feds couldn't intercept every call, and they wouldn't always be there to save the day.
I'm pretty sure that was Saul.
Mia. The feds investigated one death threat after another against me and Olivia in the months after Peter and Junior were moved into the MCC. In fact, there were so many that I started to lose count. There was one incident that stood out the most. An informant gave information that Sergio Gomez had been staking out Olivia's house.
Oh, it wasn't Saul. This is Saul.
Armed and ready to kidnap her. The feds called us immediately, and they practically banned us from the state.
Yo, the crybaby killer is back. That's the type of parasite you can't get rid of, boy. This fool's trying to snatch up Val while they're in prison. You can't fuck up the movie. There's nothing you can do to fuck it up. The truth is stranger than fiction. This dude reared his little ugly head again. He just popped up out of nowhere again. Saul, Sergio.
You girls cannot be here anymore, they said. The threats are coming in every direction, and we aren't going to be able to intercept every single one before it ends in tragedy. We think you should move to throw off anyone who's looking for you. It had become a job in and of itself to protect us, and they needed to focus their efforts on the cases they had to build. It didn't take much convincing. Olivia and I decided to leave town right away.
Olivia. We'd missed Junior and Peter's family since we'd been back in the States. While we'd gone straight to Chicago, they'd settled far away in Alabama because they wanted to be somewhere quiet and warm, far from Chicago.
Damn.
Besides the time Adrian had come to visit, it had been months since we'd seen them. We'd only been able to talk about Junior and Peter on the phone. They were going through the same emotions we were, and I didn't just think they could help us cope. I realized they might also be able to help me with Brandon. He'd been going through so much being away from his dad, and when we'd lived in Mexico, he'd always enjoyed being with Junior's family. He missed them, we all did, and I hoped being around family would help us feel closer to Junior. So we packed up our things.
You're lucky Armando was with you when you was running into these guys that the twins was rolling up. Because had the family been in Alabama at that point, or had he been in Alabama and not with you, could have been a big problem.
And my boys and I moved in with Daniela and Adrian, while Mia and Bella looked for their own place.
Mia. After 6 months in the MCC, Peter and Junior had been transferred to a county prison in Wisconsin, then to a federal facility in Kansas. We planned on visiting them every week. Life for them in Kansas was so much better, and Peter couldn't have been happier. The MCC had been so bad that any place else was going to feel like the Ritz-Carlton.
Olivia. In the middle of nowhere, Kansas, there were 50 or more prisoners housed at a federal prison. They were all informants protected under the Witness Protection Program, and everyone, except for Junior and Peter, had been convicted and sentenced. Some were mobsters, and others were drug dealers, but none were on the level of Peter and Junior. There are only a handful of these prisons in the country, and the government doesn't just place anyone who's worked with the feds there. You have to be a really big deal and be in an extremely dangerous situation.
So it's a rogues gallery of informants.
Mia. When Olivia and I visited Junior and Peter, there was no glass separating us from them, and there was no dirty black phone you'd have to speak through. Instead, we sat on chairs in a super tiny visiting room, and Brandon, Benjamin, and Bella could actually play because they had a small area for kids. The guards were so nice to us because they saw us every weekend, and realizing how family-oriented Peter and Junior were, they treated them well. They let them hold the babies, which they hadn't been able to do in Wisconsin. It certainly wasn't like being at home, but Junior and Peter said that if they could have served their whole time there, they would have.
Olivia. They weren't locked down 24/7, so they spent their days working out, writing love letters to us, signing extradition papers, and meeting with prosecutors and DEA agents when they were needed. Even though they worried so much about our safety, they were happy because they felt closer to us, with 300 phone minutes a month and visiting privileges every weekend. Plus, it may sound funny, but the company was better. It feels good to be around people and just talk about normal things that have nothing to do with business, Junior said. Junior's such a people person, and I knew he needed that socialization, and he loved our visits, which were finally regular. I rented an apartment in Kansas and would fly up there every Friday from Alabama, staying till Sunday. I didn't care if there was a blizzard or 15 inches of snow on the ground. We might as well buy our own snowplow to hook up to the front of our trucks, I joked with Mia, because nothing's going to stop us from getting to our visits.
You guys tell me, again, all of this talk that I hear, all of this puteria comments that I hear in the comments and that I read in the comments about how these gold diggers are always up to no good and they love, they love the clout and the game and they were the mastermind and this was all a play by them and all of this shit. Why them girls was going through blizzards to go see these dudes? Like, they could have just disconnected, made it very simple for themselves and let the boys figure it out for themselves in the joint. It happens all the time. Then you got those people that are willing to crawl up a mountain to get there. You know what I'm saying? Nobody accounts for that part. Everybody pushes this dramatic soap opera shit, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, we not talking about the fact that everywhere these dudes went, prison to prison, somehow these chicks moved there, got there, crawled there, and did what they had to do.
As much as I loved seeing Junior, It was so difficult to travel with my kids being so small. Benjamin always cried a lot on the flights, and people would give us dirty looks when he did. Prisons are never close to cities, so the drive from the airport there was 2 hours in the best of conditions, which they rarely were in winter. On Christmas, one of my flights was delayed because of snow, so I only got to spend 30 minutes with Junior. I didn't care. I would have driven across the country just to see him for 3 minutes. When I got back home on Sunday, I pretty much had to start repacking right away for the next weekend. I constantly felt like a truck had run over me, but I knew I depended on my visits as much as Junior did. They got me through my week. Sometimes, the travel made me despise my life, but Junior always kept me grounded. He'd remind me how blessed we were that we were alive and healthy and had each other. Most importantly, visits were the only time our boys had with their dad, and it was amazing to see the bond that grew every weekend.
I tell you what, it's a lot of mamas that wouldn't give a damn. I mean, they probably care, but they'd be like, but it's too much. I can't take it. I want them to know their father, but this is too much. I can't take it. Like, these two managed to get her done.
Brandon absolutely lives for Junior. Every year, when he blows out the candles on his birthday cake, his only wish is for his daddy to come home. Benjamin doesn't know what it's like to have Junior home, but like his brother, he loves him unconditionally, and when his birthday comes around, we count the years Junior's been gone. Still, seeing their dad in prison wasn't always easy for them. In fact, for Brandon, it was actually painful.
Mia. Brandon would break down every weekend, and Peter and I felt terrible watching it. We'd hear a cry that's hard to describe. It was like he was hurting inside, and that feeling was screaming to come out.
Olivia. Brandon was the only baby who remembered his dad outside of a prison wall, so he took it the hardest. He understood what it was like to miss someone so much that it physically hurts.
Mia. Life with their dads in prison was all the babies had ever known, and for my new baby, it was going to be the same. I knew it wasn't going to be easy to keep our family close, given the circumstances, but I kept telling myself, this is your life now, and this is just what you have to do. Sometimes it wasn't so bad. Compared to so many women who get pregnant with no steady partner and no support system, I had it good. In fact, Peter was already bending over backward to be involved with my pregnancy, and he had been since the beginning. Because I couldn't call Peter in prison, I had to wait for him to call me. To feel more involved in family life, Peter always noted all my appointments in his calendar, plus our family events and little occasions like the day Bella got her first tooth. The first few months after I found out I was pregnant, he stored up all his phone minutes, knowing he couldn't waste them since I had big doctor's visits coming up. The day I found out whether we were having a boy or a girl, I sat on my hands for what felt like forever till he called. I knew he'd marked it in his calendar. He just hadn't been given the opportunity to use the phone. Then, my cell rang, and before he even had a chance to say hello, I started talking. Are you ready to teach your son how to play basketball? I'm having a son? He screamed. He was so loud the whole prison probably shook, and hearing him so happy made my heart sing. Right then, I needed that pure joy, that crazy excitement, because what I refused to tell my husband was that I was having a really, really hard time living with his family in Alabama.
Olivia. Everyone's lives had completely changed when we left Mexico, but Mia and I rolled with it. Sure, it was hard, but not because we didn't have the material things we were used to, and certainly not because we regretted what Peter and Junior had done. We were proud of them. We just missed our husbands terribly and worried constantly that we were going to be killed by the cartels, who had the money and the means to track us down. Peter and Junior's family, on the other hand, couldn't stand the fact that they started working for the government. While it brought out the best in us, it was just the opposite for them.
Mia. Peter and Junior had been their family's meal tickets. With them gone, and in such a shameful way, their parents and siblings complained all the time. There was constant fighting. When Peter and Junior told their family they had to get jobs like normal people do, I heard my in-laws complain. What kind of job do they expect us to do? They asked, genuinely confused and angry. They were just paralyzed, sitting around the house doing next to nothing.
Olivia. Junior and Peter had enabled their family members. They were so used to living in Mexico, where you pay cash for everything. In the United States, you have to have credit, and you need references to rent a house. Peter's dad was a convicted felon who'd been a fugitive for years. He wasn't a landlord's dream tenant, and he sure as hell wasn't going to get a credit card to make him look better on paper. Credit was for poor people, not him.
Mia. I don't blame them for being so self-involved, but I hated that they couldn't see how depressed I was. They complained constantly to me, assuming that I could do something, when all the while I was thinking, how can I fix anything when I'm as lost as you are?
Well, if we're talking about the parents they ain't thinking about no depression. That shit wasn't a word in their era.
My parents were so overprotective when it came to me and Bella, and I knew they would have come and packed me up in a day if I'd asked them to. But I was too ashamed to tell them that I was at my very worst. I even shied away from talking to Peter about it, since I knew all he wanted was for me to be happy. Adrian and Daniela would check on me from time to time, but they had their own lives. I felt so alone, living in my apartment with Bella, and I struggled every day. Bella was a huge baby. I'm tiny, and she was half as big as I was. People would see us out and say, "Is that your baby, or are you babysitting for someone?" With my belly, I could hardly pick her up. In that awful heat, I'd be pouring sweat. The best I could do was just let Bella float in a little raft in the pool all day to cool us down and tire her out. At night, I'd cook a healthy dinner for myself, we'd take a long bath, and I'd read to her. Then I'd turn on the television, let Bella fall asleep in my arms, then cry silently to myself. In the morning, I could hardly get up, but I'd force myself to pick up Bella and go out and run errands. As soon as I put her in her car seat, she'd already be dripping in sweat. Yet no one in Peter's family offered to help me. No one.
Olivia. They just didn't understand why Junior and Peter were doing what they were doing, and it consumed them.
It's past your understanding already. You already in the mix. You've already benefited from what they're doing in the sense that you got your way to the United States. You know what I'm saying? The people that are hunting you in Mexico, you in the United States, you've already benefited from what they're doing. It doesn't matter if you understand. The fact is, it's what it is. It's time to work. It's time to get money. Being dumbfounded don't benefit nobody.
It was like they didn't have time and energy to consider anyone but themselves, and they couldn't see the big picture. They didn't think about Peter and Junior, that if they hadn't made the decision they had, they'd be dead or in prison for life. My father-in-law took it the worst. To him, Junior and Peter becoming snitches was the most horrible thing they'd ever done. When he'd found out his sons were cooperating, he'd screamed, "You're both cowards!" and stormed out of the house. They were the last words he'd spoken in the months before they'd turned themselves in, and since their dad never visited them in prison, it was one of the last memories they had of him.
Crazy.
It hurt them deeply. Peter and Junior knew that what they were doing was right, but the little boys inside of them still wanted their dad's approval. I didn't know what to feel because I loved my father-in-law, but I felt terrible for what he'd said to Junior and Peter. Being called cowards broke their hearts. But I didn't hold it against my father-in-law. It was just the way he'd been raised.
Mia. In my family, we always greet each other with a hug and a kiss. That's just what we do. We say goodbye with a hug and a kiss, too. My dad's never been anything but affectionate and loving with me. Always smiling and pleasant to be around. Sure, he gets upset about things and speaks his mind, but he's not an angry guy. He's manly, but not macho. That's the opposite of Peter's dad. Senor always had this way about him that I feared right from the first time I met him. He never smiled, and at dinner he'd get really stern and pound his fist on the table when he'd talk. I'd think, oh my goodness, is he mad? He wasn't, or usually wasn't.
Me either.
He was just passionate.
That's my life story right there. Passion being mistaken for aggression.
For the first year or so I knew my father-in-law, our conversations consisted of good morning and good night. That was it. There was no small talk. There was no, hi, are you having a good day? And there was certainly no hugging or kissing when we saw each other. We were all business. At the time, I thought, maybe he's so unfriendly because he already has so many sons-in-law and daughters-in-law, and having another is no biggie. But now I realize that's just the way he was. He was set in his ways. Peter understood this, and he went with it and spoke to him like a friend. They'd sometimes argue, usually about money, and I'd keep my mouth shut the whole time. When it was over and his dad had stormed off into another room, I'd say, look what just happened. You can't get out of line with your dad. Peter would laugh. That's just how he is, Mia. He's not really mad. It's just how he is.
Olivia. My father-in-law was a typical old-school Mexican man. He was completely different than my dad, who was encouraging and supportive and wanted me to be smart and independent like my mom. Still, I got along with my father-in-law, and I actually really understood him. I never judged him, and I grew to love him. When I first came on the scene, I wasn't afraid to be as strong as him. I spoke my mind, and over the years, I'd call him out if I thought he did something wrong. Sometimes it wasn't pretty, but I think he appreciated that someone was having a real conversation with him, actually paying attention to him, even if it was more of a debate. He wouldn't really argue with me. He'd just smirk and smile to himself. He thought I was funny. Once, he woke up my mother-in-law after one of our late-night debates. "Olivia is muy cabrona," he said, meaning I was a real badass bitch who didn't take no shit. My mother-in-law just smiled, rolled over, and went back to sleep.
Mia. Despite my initial hesitation, I grew to love my father-in-law. Not just because he was family, but because I started to understand him. He began to seem like a normal person, not the stereotypical macho Mexican guy he tried to make himself out to be. When I first moved to San Juan, Peter started buying horses. His hobby soon became my hobby, and our bonding time began to involve us driving to different ranches to look at horses. 9 times out of 10, his parents would come with us. Once, we all traveled together to a ranch about 2 hours away. As we drove up to the front gate, Senor was greeted by a worker who opened his arms up to him. "Oh, Margarito! Buenos dias, how are you?" the man said. "Very good, and very excited to be here." My father-in-law looked genuinely thrilled. We got in the back of the worker's pickup truck and drove into an overgrown field. The ground was so...
You're definitely always going to see more charisma when they're around friends and associates than you're going to see around family. That generation.
Tangled up with grass that you couldn't really see where you were going, but we got out of the truck and started walking anyway. About 10 steps in, the rancher opened his palm, which he'd filled with oats. All of a sudden, wild, beautiful horses came out from behind the trees like magic and began making their way through the grass toward us. I looked over at my father-in-law, and I saw his eyes light up. He began to smile, completely in awe. I don't think I'd ever seen him melt like that.
The duality of
right
man.
There and then I saw his softer side, and for the first time, I felt close to him. Even though I was so scared of him most of the time, at that moment, we were close. I try to remember those moments now when I think about him.
Olivia. My father-in-law loved his grandchildren, especially Benjamin and Bella. In Mexico, when you're light-skinned or have blonde hair or blue eyes, people are like, wow. Benjamin and Bella are fair-skinned, and my father-in-law would always stare at them and say, they're beautiful, like porcelain dolls. He loved to hold Benjamin and hug him, and he'd sing to Bella until she fell asleep. He was the perfect grandfather to them at a time when they didn't really have their fathers, or at least that constant male presence. That's why I didn't understand why he wanted to leave. He had everything: a family, grandchildren he loved, and most of all, safety. No one knew where he was in Alabama, and chances were good that no one was going to come after him. But he was angry with his sons for being snitches, for taking him away from his other family, and most of all, for making him flee from his home.
Mia. When you live in Mexico, you realize pretty quickly that there are people who never want to leave. They love their town, and they love their country. That's how my father-in-law was.
Olivia. That longing for home started before he'd gone back to America. In fact, after my father-in-law returned from his kidnapping, Peter and Junior bought him and my mother-in-law a mansion near our home in Guadalajara. They convinced them to leave San Juan, saying it wasn't safe. I completely furnished and decorated the mansion beautifully, and we threw a massive housewarming party for them around Christmas 2006, with a huge Christmas tree, a red sparkly bow on the door, and a 12-man mariachi band serenading them as they drove up to their new house. That night, my father-in-law was in tears, remembering how different his last Christmas had been. But days later, he soured. He started talking about how much he missed San Juan, and he began complaining about being away from home to anyone who would listen.
Mia.
Made up his mind.
That was the way he was in Alabama, too. Never mind that he had a wife he'd been married to for almost 50 years and grandkids who adored him and were there almost daily. From the moment he crossed the border into the United States, he began talking about going back. Something was calling him home, and no one was going to tell him otherwise.
Olivia. A few weeks after I moved to Alabama, I went over to my in-laws' house. No one answered the door, so I walked to the back. There, I saw my father-in-law, sitting by himself in a chair in the garden. He was staring at some flowers, deep in thought. I considered going through the gate to talk to him, but I was afraid he was going to tell me how disappointed he was in his sons. I was always defensive when it came to Junior and Peter, and the last thing I wanted to do was say something I'd regret to my father-in-law.
Probably the last time she saw him.
Suddenly, Adrian approached me. He'd come from the other side of the house, and he'd just seen me observing his dad. I looked at Adrian and lowered my voice. He's going to leave. He doesn't want to be here. You're crazy, Adrian said. But I wasn't. I knew what I knew, and I couldn't explain why. A few days later, in late March 2009, Adrian called me. My dad is gone, he said. He just picked up and left. Margarito Flores Sr. had packed a small bag and driven away in his car that morning. Adrian and I didn't discuss it, but we knew where he'd gone and why he hadn't taken much with him. Apparently, everything he needed was back home in Mexico. How could he do this to my mother-in-law? I thought. How could he do this to his sons? If something happens to him, they won't be able to live with themselves. He can't go back, I said to Adrian. The cartels are going to find him and kill him. What the fuck is wrong with him?
I wonder how quick it was.
There's nothing we can do, Liv, Adrian said. He's a grown man, and he knows what can happen to him. You know how he is. No one could have changed his mind. Even though I knew he was right, I still felt guilty for not trying. No one could tell my father-in-law shit, not Adrian, and especially not me. When he had his mind made up about something, that was just going to be the way it was. Damn the consequences.
Mia. He didn't seem to mind that Mexico was a war zone. The cartel wars were raging, and in fact, they'd been escalating the entire time Peter and Junior had been cooperating. On May 9th, 2008, Arturo Beltran Leyva's BLO army had sprayed Chapo's son, Edgar's car, with 200 bullets, killing him. In retaliation, Chapo began an all-out battle on the streets of Culiacan, complete with firefights and shootouts, and there was a curfew so innocent people could avoid getting killed. But the danger now wasn't just from random gunfire. Cartel members wanted to get revenge on Peter and Junior, and if that meant targeting their family, that was just fine.
Olivia. Margarito Sr. didn't care, though. In Mexico, there was a little church he liked to walk around in. In Mexico, he could speak Spanish. In Alabama, he lived in the suburbs, and there was no corner store you could walk to. In Alabama, there were no people hanging out in the plaza. There were no stories. There was no past. He'd gone back to Mexico to have all of that again.
Mia. We didn't hear anything for over a month. Then, one of the U.S. attorneys called Peter and Junior. "We found your dad's car in the desert in Sinaloa," the lawyer said. "It had a note on the windshield, warning both of you to keep your mouths shut." There was no blood in the car, no bullet holes, and no other evidence of foul play. But I know kidnappings. I've lived through one of my own, and two of my husband's. Kidnappers don't kill you in your car. They pull you out, put you in another car, and take you somewhere else. Sometimes the police will find your body, but most of the time they don't. My father-in-law fell into the latter category. He just vanished into thin air. Olivia and I visited our husbands in prison that weekend. "It's all our fault," Peter said. "We did this." Junior was crying. "My poor mother. She's all alone now, and it's because of us." "It's not. Please stop blaming yourselves," I pleaded. I was lying, though. Their dad would have lived if they hadn't become informants. He'd still be in Mexico, betting hundreds of thousands of dollars on the horses, enjoying his wife's cooking.
Would he, though? You would have had to make a choice at that point between cartels and worked for one of them, or the other one was going to come for the whole family. So would he be the first one that they went after or not? Who knows?
Stealing hours here and there with his second family, sitting on the beach in front of his house on a beautiful day and pounding his fists on the dinner table. I missed him that day, and I've missed him every day since. We'll never know what happened. Margarito Flores' death was just one of thousands that year during the cartel wars, but we just pray that he didn't suffer. We hope that he went in peace.
Also in the chat said they got to fuck with them. Yeah. At the end of the day, there's two ways that game ends, and both of those ways was coming at them at the same time. Death and prison. And at that point, the old man made up his mind. You know, there's a lot of men in here. You know, there's not many people that could push us off our square and make us change our mind. That has to come from within. That has to be something that you want to do. He was going to make his decision and he was going to go.